Hi everybody, let's talk about Sword of Destiny. Sword of Destiny is the second short story collection in the Witcher Saga. If you don't know, the Witcher Saga has two short story collections. The first one is The Last Wish, and the second one is Sword of Destiny, which are set before the main novels. So the novels, there are 5 novels, and there is one follow-up prequel book, and the two short story collections are set before the 5 main novels. You should start with The Last Wish, and then this is technically the second book you should read before you go into Blood of Elves, which is the first novel in the saga. I did a review for The Last Wish, which I will link up in the info cards if you're interested. And in this video, I will talk about Sword of Destiny, and there will be a review for the other books as well. I am through book 3, so book 3, the review will come out very soon. The way this review is structured, I'll do a little bit of a spoiler-free section, and then later on I will go into a more spoilery section. Alright, so this book has 6 short stories, similar to The Last Wish. Different than in The Last Wish is that in this book we don't have a framing story. The 6 stories we get here are kind of separate, but I do think they have links in between, so I don't think that the framing story is really missing, because there was a good flow to the book. But so I did miss the framing story a bit, because I think in The Last Wish it was pretty good. There is no framing story here, but I have to say there are some very, very strong stories in this book. I would argue there are 2 stories that are better than anything in The Last Wish, but there are also a few weaker stories. I feel like the first 4 stories are they're fine. Some of them are weaker than anything in The Last Wish. Some of them are on par, but the last 2 stories in this collection are amazing, and I feel like those are the best things that I've read from this series so far. So in the Last Wish review, I talked about how it was a big setup for Geralt's character, and also some world building and some introduction to the different side characters we get in this story. And I feel like in this book we focused a bit more on the side characters. Like, Geralt is still the main character, but there is a lot more focus on his relationships with the main side characters that were introduced in The Last Wish. I feel like this is even more of a character-driven story. Like, the plots of the stories are quite interesting, but I feel like really the characters and the relationships in this book are what makes it shine and makes it stand out. Also, there is some interesting world building with some cool plot and action sequences. There are interesting monsters still. There are interesting new aspects of this world that are revealed throughout this book, which I think is quite interesting. And yeah, I think it's cool because it keeps the book quite fresh. I feel like all the stories are quite different. And yeah, I feel like it's quite cool because you don't get any 2 stories that I would say are too similar. As I said, the story is very character and relationship driven at this point. We get 6 stories. 2 stories deal with Geralt's relationship with one side character, 2 with a different side character, and 2 with a third side character, which I felt like was pretty cool. And what is really interesting is that the last 2 short stories in this collection bring together all the short stories that we saw in this book and in the first book. So at the end of this novel, we end up at a place where I felt like it was a really interesting ending point to lead into the main novels. And it seemed like, yeah, now we have a big setup for something, and now the real story can start, despite the fact that these 2 books have been amazing in themselves already. All right, this is all I'm going to say for spoiler free, because a lot of stuff that I would say is redundant from my Last Wish review. So if you want more spoiler-free thoughts, again, check out my Last Wish review. So I will go into spoilers for some time now. I will put a timestamp on the screen for when you can come back for my final remarks and my rating. So yeah, just if you don't want any spoilers, go to that timestamp and then you can see my final remarks. If you're interested in spoilers, stay tuned. Again, this is now the spoiler section. So I want to go into the separate short stories. So the first short story we get is The Bounds of Reason. This is a story about a dragon hunt, which I thought had a really interesting premise with the whole dragon hunt aspect of this story. But I also feel like this story dragged a bit, like it was quite long. There were quite a few side characters that, yeah, there was like side characters in terms of really secondary characters, not side characters that are really important at this point. it felt like the story was a bit unfocused, so I got a bit bored in the middle. Yeah, I feel like it would have helped if there were less side characters. Like, there's a reason why there are so many, but I felt like the story wasn't focused enough on one thing, and I couldn't really get into any of the characters that were introduced. And I also felt like, for the fact that this story is about a fight with a dragon, the action sequences were fine, not great. Yeah, I mean, I expected more from this story because, I mean, Dragon Hunt in itself sounds like a really amazing thing, and I felt a little bit let down from that. But the amazing thing about this short story is the relationship development between Geralt and Yennefer. And I think that was pretty cool because the story actually picks up a bit later from where we left in The Last Wish. So Geralt and Yennefer have had this on and off relationship, and in this story they meet again, and yeah, so we get this dynamic between Geralt and Yennefer that is quite interesting about how they feel for each other, and about, I would say, yeah, toxic maybe their relationship is, but also we see them get back together. We see that they're a pretty good team. So yeah, I think it was quite a good story to focus more on the relationship between Geralt and Yennefer. After this story, we still remained with Geralt and Yennefer in the next story, which is A Shard of Ice, which is actually one of my favorite stories in this collection, because so this story is quite, I would say, a bit confusing, because there is a lot of stuff happening, but it isn't really an action-based story. It's, again, this is, I think, maybe the most relationship-focused story in this book, and we focus a lot now on the relationship between Yennefer and Geralt. And yeah, and we get introduced to this character called Istrid, who is one of Yennefer's love interests from the past. And we get kind of a love triangle thing here, where Yennefer is trying to decide between Istrid and Geralt, and she's also dealing with this desire to be a mother. It seems like Yennefer is not in the best state of mind in this story, and she has to go through this decision whether she wants to be with Geralt or with Istrid. We get a view from Geralt's point of view, obviously, on this whole situation, which makes it quite interesting, because we see Geralt, who has at this point been with Yennefer for a while again, so there was a time jump between this story and the last. So we see Geralt and Yennefer, they've been together, but now Geralt feels like he might lose Yennefer. Yeah, so it's interesting to see what that does to him, and he is actually ready to fight with Istrid over Yennefer, but it turns out that Yennefer actually leaves both of them, which I felt was quite a strong decision, and it was quite an interesting decision. So yeah, this story was very character and relationship focused, with a bit of action, not too much of action, but I really, really liked it, especially because there is so much material that you can dive into. Like, I was, as I said in the beginning, a bit confused with this story, because there are a lot of like symbolic things that are written. Like, there is this sentence, "Truth is a shard of ice," which opens a lot of different interpretations about this story. And if I remember, I'll link a Reddit thread down below where this story is discussed. And I thought that was quite amazing, that there are so many different interpretations of the story you can have. And yeah, I personally really love this story. I really enjoy the Geralt and Yennefer dynamic. I know a lot of people don't like Yennefer, but for me, I'm in the weird position that I actually read half of The Last Wish, then watched the show, and then continued with The Last Wish, and then Sword of Destiny. So I was kind of already hooked for the Geralt and Yennefer thing, and I think the actress who played Yennefer did an amazing job. So yeah, I personally like Yennefer, despite the fact how toxic the relationship is. And I feel like actually the relationship isn't just toxic because of Yennefer. I feel like the toxicity comes between both parties. So I think this is a very interesting story that gives us a strong focus on this Geralt-Yennefer dynamic. The next story is Eternal Flame, which is again a very character-focused but also world-building focused story. So this story deals with the friendship between Dandelion and Geralt, and we get a really good look into the world and how the economy kind of in this world works, and also how non-human characters live in this world. So in this world we get introduced to Vexlings, I think they're called, which are creatures that can take the shape of anything they see. So they can see you and just turn into you. They don't just get your appearance, but they also get your mental abilities, so they know your thoughts and stuff, which is quite an interesting creature. And we see how these kind of creatures and also some other creatures live in this world, how they have to deal with humans. Yeah, it is quite an interesting story again. Yeah, I don't think it was the best story overall, but I did like the story. The next story is again a very good one. It's called A Little Sacrifice. And this is actually a story that is very focused on Dandelion. So we meet the side character called Essie. She's a friend, but also a female bard. So Dandelion is a friend of Essie, but they also have this kind of competitive relationship, which is quite interesting. And in this short story, we actually get a relationship between Essie and Geralt. So we see a different romantic relationship for Geralt. We also see that Geralt is not interested in the person that is not Yennefer at this point, which obviously may be related to the Last Wish story in the last book. There is this dynamic for Geralt and Essie, which seems quite natural, and it seems like it's a pretty cool thing. So it seems like it could be a good relationship, but in the end we find out that Geralt just can't go for somebody who isn't Yennefer at this point, which indirectly also builds his relationship with Yennefer, which is quite interesting. Although I said this is a very character-focused story, there is a whole big action part here. We get introduced to a lot of new characters. We get introduced to basically mermaids in this world, which is quite interesting. The background for this story is really interesting, but I feel like really the focus of this story was more on character growth for Dandelion because of his relationship with Essie and with Geralt, and he had to kind of moderate what was going on between Geralt and Essie. I feel like although the whole backstory with the mermaid and stuff was quite interesting, I feel like what really made it shine once again is this relationship dynamic between Dandelion, Geralt, and Essie, and indirectly Yennefer. The next story we got is The Sword of Destiny. And in this story, we finally get introduced to Cirilla, or Ciri, who is Geralt's child, surprise, from the story A Question of Price in The Last Wish. So you probably know, but yeah, in A Question of Price, Geralt basically binds this child to himself, who is Ciri, who is the princess of this kingdom called Cintra. In this story, actually, Ciri and Geralt meet by chance in the Brokilon forest. Geralt actually doesn't know that it is Ciri because in the last book we thought in The Question of Price that he actually wants to have Ciri, but in this story it seems like he isn't really interested in having her, because in the end he finds out that it is Ciri, but he still doesn't want to take her with her. So it is an interesting dynamic. I think the dynamic between Geralt and Ciri in general was quite cool. It showed us hints to how their dynamic in the next books may work, and also that they have a really cool relationship that could be a really big focus of the main novels. I also really liked the setting of this story in this Brokilon forest and the race of dryads, which was quite different from anything I've read. And also I feel like it was very different from what the show did, which I think the show kind of, I don't want to say butchered, but I feel like they dropped the ball a bit on this story, because I feel like this was an amazing story. This is my second favorite story in this collection. And yeah, as the name of the story says, The Sword of Destiny, which is also the name of the book, this story is very focused on the theme of destiny. And we get this main dryad character who tries to convince Geralt that destiny is a thing, because we know that Geralt doesn't really believe in destiny. And yeah, it seems like this theme is something that's obviously quite big in this whole saga anyway. And yeah, I really enjoyed the story. I think the dynamic between Geralt and Ciri was so interesting that, because I already knew that Ciri and Geralt was a big part of what the story was about. So I was really hyped after this story to get more Ciri and Geralt. And that leads us into the last short story in this book, which is called Something More. And wow, this is the best story, I think, in both these short story collections. Something More is amazing because this is really the story that combines all the different aspects that was introduced in all the short stories. So in this story, Geralt helps out this small folk person but gets hurt doing it. And so a lot of this story is actually fever dreams of Geralt and maybe some visions, maybe some stuff that is real, but maybe visions. So I think most of the stuff is clear that what is a fever dream and what isn't. But there is one aspect of this story that I feel like is clearly, I think it's real, but there is clearly this ambiguity that it could be a vision, but it may have been a real thing. What we see in this, we get a vision of Geralt and Yennefer, which seems like it is actually an event that happened in the past, in which Geralt and Yennefer met at this festival. They get together. At the end of the story, it just ends in the same place, that they can't stay together. What's interesting about this is, so this may very well be an event that happened, but this may also just be a fever dream. I'm not sure which one it is. I think it is something that happened, but it may actually just be a dream. We also get to see Geralt and Dandelion. So the background of this story is that there is this kingdom called Nilfgaard who is trying to take over the continent, and they are attacking the kingdom of Sintra, which is obviously where Geralt's child surprise Ciri lives. What Geralt is also trying to do in this story is, while Nilfgaard is attacking Sintra, obviously a lot of people are fleeing away from Sintra, but Geralt wants to go back to protect Ciri, and we get to see him and Dandelion talk about this, whether he should go back, whether he shouldn't go back. That was also an interesting aspect to this story, where we get Geralt and Dandelion's relationship a little bit. And then we get another vision from the past. This is something that clearly has happened, but we get, I think, a dream of it between Geralt and Queen Calanthe, who is Ciri's grandmother. And this is actually when Geralt goes to Sintra, and he tells Calanthe basically that he isn't going to take Ciri from her. Yeah, so we get another view of actually Geralt not knowing that Ciri is actually a girl. And we get to have this like one final moment between Geralt and Calanthe, which is quite interesting. And now the most interesting vision / something that may have happened really, I'm going to call it a fever dream right now. I'm going to explain why. So Geralt has this fever dream vision that he sees his mother, who is called Vicenna. So the whole backstory is that, obviously, in the main timeline of this story, Geralt is injured, and this person he helped out in the beginning of the story is trying to get him some help. We see that some sorceress helps him out, and Geralt has the vision that the sorceress is actually his mother, Vicenna, who gave him away, like as a child, to Vesemir, who is the person who trained him to be a Witcher. And Geralt has this back and forth with this woman, who may be Vicenna. So again, this may be just a conversation that's happening in his head, that he's trying to find out why his mother gave him away, and he's trying to justify that his mother gave him away, that she didn't know how hard it is to become a Witcher. And yeah, in the end, we just see that Vicenna tells him that it doesn't matter why she gave him away, because it's too late now, and there is no point in talking about this now. But we see that Geralt just isn't quite done with this. Obviously, despite the fact that he has been a Witcher for a very long time now, he still has this thing in him that he doesn't know why his mother gave him away, and there is, I think, some really big potential to pick this back up in the later book. I don't know if this will be picked up in the later book, but yeah, I think this was quite interesting as well, and it put in a new interesting character dimension to Geralt. And now, so a lot of things already happened in the story, but now again in the main timeline, when Geralt helps this man, and he invokes the law of surprise again, and So basically, the man takes him to his home, and we find out that his wife has actually found a girl who is living with them recently, and who knows, again, the theme of destiny, it ends up being Ciri, who fled from Sintra when Nilfgaard attacked. We really get this second time that Geralt gets linked with Ciri through this law of surprise, and at this point we get the ending where Ciri finally asks Geralt that this time they will stay together, because already in the last story she wanted to go with Geralt, but Geralt didn't take her. But now, since basically Sintra is gone, Sintra has been sacked, and Ciri's family is basically gone. Everybody is dead, and now Geralt actually sees that maybe destiny is actually a thing. So the story is called Something More, and that's actually a point that all these visions actually have this point that Geralt or also other people are saying that destiny is not enough. Something more is needed. And the strong thing here is that we see that Ciri is linked again to Geralt, which may be a coincidence, maybe destiny. I think if you see how much focus there is on destiny in this show, it may be a very destiny thing. And yeah, I love how this story ends, because I think I still get chills just talking about it. Ciri asks Geralt, "I am your destiny, right?" And Geralt answers, "No, you're something more, much more." And that's where this book ends. And I love this line. I think it is amazing. I think this story is probably the best short story I've read ever. I haven't read a lot of short stories, but yeah, I love this short story. I know I probably didn't do it justice just talking about what happened, but I hope I gave you a good overview on how I feel about this story. All right, let's wrap this thing up. My final remarks to this story. So I think this is a very strong continuation of the story. I think there is a lot of character building for Geralt, Yennefer, Dandelion, and Cirilla. I think there is a lot of relationship building between Geralt and all these side characters that really feels like this will be the core of the main novels. These 4 characters will be the main 4 characters going into the novels. I have to say, the characters and relationships are what makes these stories stand out. Yes, the plot is interesting, but even in the stories that the plot isn't interesting, where I would say, yeah, this is just a 3-star story, I feel like the characters and relationships pull it up to a 4-star or even a 5-star story. And I have to say, as with The Last Wish, these stories all have very strong themes in them. When you get into this story, you get this like fairy tale kind of vibe, but it isn't this like positive fairy tale vibe. It is still dark-ish, I would say. I wouldn't say it's like grimdark, but it is dark. And especially with what is happening in this world and the positions the main characters find themselves in, it gives a very twisted view on fairy tale-like stories, and the focus on themes is very interesting. So yeah, I think this book is a strong lead-in for the novel series that is coming up. So the next book is Blood of Elves, and the way this book wraps up actually made me want to pick up Blood of Elves immediately. Yeah, I've already read Blood of Elves. I obviously won't say what I think about it right now, but there will be a review for Blood of Elves probably next week, so stay tuned for that. If you want to talk about Sword of Destiny, chat with me in the comments. If you write spoilers, please tag them. So just write that you're spoiling something, just so people who haven't read this book know that they shouldn't read that. But yeah, if you're interested in talking about the book, I'll be replying to the comments down below. I hope you liked this video. Check out my other videos as well. Some should have popped up right here. Leave a subscribe, leave a like if you liked it. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.